Okay, so I was doing a live workshop last night, and the conversation came up about back to school. So, and people that were, at the workshop, they have kids, they work in the school systems. So it was basically like, yep, it's time for all these kids to get sick. And I said to them, I said, well, you know, first of all, I said, just that consciousness of, well, it's just time for all the kids to get sick again. Oh, it's flu season. It's back to school time. It's just time for everyone to get sick. It's like, well, hold on a second. First of all, not every kid gets sick. That's the first thing. And what I said was, I said, what are some things that you think contribute to these kids getting sick when they go back to school? I said, let's think about it for a second. Like, what are some things that contribute? Like, we like that word contribute. When we look at things from a holistic perspective, I'm trying to change the way that you actually look at health, and especially for your kid. Okay. So they started thinking, and I started like feeding them some answers. And I said, think about the school, right, that they're going into. They're going into a closed building. How's the air circulation? Could there be some, toxins in the air? Could there be toxins in the environment? Okay, definitely. That's one thing. What about the lighting that they're sitting in? What about the fact that they're just sitting in a posture that's just not good for them? Like that. What about the cafeteria, the food they're eating? You see what I'm saying? So we talked about all these different variables that can contribute. Oh, the fact that other kids bring stuff into the classroom, and we talked about all that. And I said, okay. Plus the social part of it, like, you think about it, like you're around a bunch of new kids. So there can be some anxiety. Like we have a lot of females, teenagers that come in that have social anxiety. Like they don't want to sit in their high school classes. They're very wound up. And I host a workshop every single month on stress and inflammation. So we get a lot of them as patients. The parents come to that workshop, and I explain the sympathetic fight or flight stress response. But by the time kids are brought to us, and babies, a lot of times, they've already been checked by everyone else. And right before school, a lot of kids actually go get checked. They go to their wellness visit to the doctor, and that's great. And if you ask parents, though, like, what are some of the things they actually checked? It's like, well, depending on how old they are, they might have weighed them. They checked their head. They measure their head. They look in their eyes, ears, nose, throat. They might do blood work. So they evaluate them, and they give them like a clean bill of health. All right, they're good to go. Great. But then they come into school and they all get sick. So what I asked them last night, I said, well, what's the system that keeps us healthy and prevents us from actually getting sick? I mean, all the systems work together, obviously, but they said they thought about the immune system. I said, that's right. I said, and 80% of your immune system's in your gut. I said, but when parents come in and they're like, I went to this specialist and I'm really into the holistic approach, and I saw, I was seeing a nutritionist and a functional medicine doctor. I mean, by the time the parents come here, it's like, welcome to the second to last resort. They've already had all the testing, and they got, a lot of blood testing, and then they went and they got their allergies. They went to the allergist, and they might have even done things like, stool samples, and they're checking vitamins and minerals, and they got them on supplements, and they're trying to change their diet. They've already been doing all that by the time they come here. Usually, a lot of people, some not, some come here earlier than doing all of that, but a lot, they've already been down all these roads already. And I get it, because you're trying to find the solution. But I always ask them, like, well, what's the main system that's controlling and coordinating everything? And last night, because we're talking about it, we're in the office doing what we call the vital shift, and it's all about brain, nervous system, and the spine's connection to that. That's what we do in our office. And they're like, well, the brain, that's right, the nervous system. I said, well, who checked that? And they just look at me like, and I said, like, how would you even check that? And that's a confusing question. It's like, well, what do you mean? How would I get my kid's nervous system checked? Well, that's exactly what we do. I know that, well, first of all, a lot of parents, when they bring their kids here, they know they're not just coming to like get the bones checked. They're coming to get something else checked. And other parents tell them, and they're like, no, you got to go get checked out. So we actually have technology in our office. It's the Insight Subluxation Station that can detect stress on the nervous system. It's a non-invasive thermal scan. So that's one way that we actually check babies and kids before they, can stand on their own to take an x-ray. But even a static x-ray is not really going to give the full picture. Like front to back, your spine should be straight so we can check for scoliosis, which that's, another conversation. I'll make another quick video on that. But from the side, we don't want straight. We want curves, especially that curve in the neck. When you don't have that, that's a contributing factor to put you into stress response. And if you just step back for a second and say, wait a second, what's the system that's controlling and coordinating everything? Maybe in addition to all these things that I'm doing for my kid and to, prevent them from getting sick when they go to school, maybe I should get that system checked. And what I also said to the people in the workshop last night, I said, so we're talking about this environment that these kids are going into with the bad light, the bad food, sitting, you're around a bunch of other kids, there's toxins in the air and who knows the chemicals in the building and all these things. I said, so school starts in what, 3 weeks? I said, so do you think all that's going to change in 3 weeks? That hasn't changed in years. That's not changing. Let's be honest. Even if you look at the restaurants around here, there's some great restaurants. And listen, I worked in, restaurants since I was 12 years old. Amazing. But if you look at the food trucks that deliver the food to the restaurants, it's all the same food, basically, coming from the same source, most of it, unless it's like farm to table, organic, that's awesome. But typically it's not, right? So bottom line is that's not changing. So what we're talking about is changing the environment. And well, then they said, talking about taking supplements and getting these kids to change what they eat. And they started asking me questions about that. And I said, listen, that's great that you're asking this. Of course, you should work on lifestyle. That's much harder to start with, though, okay, especially if you haven't done anything yet. And I said, and changing the environment in the schools that they're about to go into in like the next 3 weeks, that's not changing either, okay? It's just not. So I said, instead of looking at it and saying, oh man, they're going into this environment, they're going to get sick, let's step back for a second and say, wait a second, what can we do to make your child more adaptable? What can we do to make sure their immune system can function at a higher level? Well, it starts with getting them out of fight or flight, and that comes with nervous system and checking their nervous system. That's exactly what we do in our office. Most people have never heard these concepts. They've never even considered this. They've never even heard about this. They've tried everything else, like they're searching for answers, and it's confusing, I know. But I've been doing this since 2001. These concepts have been in our profession for, 130 years. And I know that, now the public thinks, and we get a lot of people, of course, back pain, neck pain, headaches. Of course, people know that, what we can do can help with that. But it's like, why would you bring your baby or a kid to a chiropractor? It's about the nervous system. So these are the types of, because I'm a neurologically based chiropractor. That's the difference, right? And your nervous system controls and coordinates everything. So I always ask parents, like, would you ever consider having your kid checked? Have the nervous system checked. It's a non-invasive scan to see if there's any stress on the nervous system. We can see in a minute if there's any stress. Then we do hands-on check. We also will take the pictures when they're able to, but if we're talking about, babies and toddlers, obviously they're not getting digital x-rays taken. So we use other ways to check them. And then we check them on the table every time they come in. And when we work on them, and we do non-force techniques, but basically what we're doing is we're working on their spine to tap into the nervous system. So when those bones are stuck in your spine, when those joints are stuck, that's sending negative nociceptive, bad information to the brain, causes release in stress hormones, and it puts you into sympathetic fight or flight. Remember, when you're in fight or flight, high cortisol, right? Systemic inflammation. Insulin resistance, systemic inflammation, right? Shuts down cell-to-cell immune system, right? A causal factor for leaky gut. Okay, so if you resonate with some of this information and what I'm starting to say right now is like, wow, okay, yeah, I've heard some of these things before. Come to the stress and inflammation workshop. I literally do a workshop all on stress and inflammation and go through all the things that happen when you're stuck in sympathetic fight or flight. And most kids are stuck in fight or flight. Okay, so it's like, it's the perfect storm that they're stuck in. So what we want to do is get you out of there and get your kid out of there. And that's what we do with non-invasive, gentle chiropractic adjustments. That helps to send positive, what's called proprioceptive signals up to the brain, specifically to the cerebellum, and tap into the vagus nerve. I had a patient come in yesterday, a new patient, and his fiance, very nice people. They had come to a workshop. She's a health coach. She's a health consultant. She's a health coach, and she knew all about, vagal stimulation and getting out of fight or flight, but they never heard of chiropractic being able to do it. See, we can tap into the vagus nerve neurologically. You see what I mean? So it's like very effective. It's non-invasive, and it's much more realistic to think right now, if school starting in 3 weeks, what's something that I can do right now to get my kid more adaptable? You could try to call the school principal and say, hey, listen, detox the school, change the lighting, change all the food, change the cafeteria. That's not going to happen, right? So we have to make your kid more adaptable. So instead of saying, oh my God, I'm afraid about this environment that they're going into and they're going to get sick. Let's just make your kid's immune system stronger. Let's make their body function at a higher level. That's really what we're talking about here. If that makes sense, right, then you should consider getting a thermal scan for your kid, getting them checked by a neurological based chiropractor. All right. If you have any questions on that, definitely ask us.